quiet ballroom, a flawless wedding, and a man certain his past would never catch up to him. Yet beneath the chandeliers, secrets waited like cracks in glass, ready to split wide open. What unfolded that night was not a celebration, but a reckoning, a moment when carefully constructed lies collapsed under the weight of undeniable truth. This story does not rush to reveal its heart. It builds step by step until one twist turns everything upside down and the ending delivers the kind of justice no one in that room expected. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe, give this video a like, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what part of the plot you think will change everything. At 23 years old, Danielle Carter believed she was stepping into the life she had always dreamed of, a fairy tale painted in the colors of youth, hope, and love. She had grown up in a modest household in Chicago, where her mother taught her that love could fix anything, that loyalty was the foundation of a strong marriage, and that if you gave your heart completely, the right man would meet you halfway. So when Marcus Reed walked into her world, tall, confident, and devastatingly handsome, Danielle convinced herself that she had found her destiny. Marcus had a presence that filled a room before his voice even followed, smooth skin that glowed in the light, and a smile that could undo any resistance. At 6'2", with a commanding frame and sharp features softened by charm, he made heads turn, but it was the way he spoke that drew Danielle in. He could weave words into promises that sounded like scripture, each phrase wrapped around her insecurities and reshaped them into devotion. When he asked her to marry him outside a little church in Atlanta, Danielle thought she was the luckiest woman alive. She saw a forever that would be built on partnership and family, a forever where she would finally live the fairy tale she had rehearsed in her head since childhood. But illusions don't shatter all at once. They reveal themselves in small cracks. For Danielle, one of those cracks had a name: Tanya Brooks, the mother of Marcus's son. Marcus brushed her off as a mistake, something from his past that meant nothing now, but his behavior told a different story. His phone was always face down, his laughter always softer when it was Tanya on the line, and his excuses about late-night visits with his son seemed too polished to be spontaneous. Danielle asked about it once, timidly, and Marcus silenced her with a kiss and a reminder that she was his wife now, his future. That should have been reassurance, but instead it became a mantra she repeated to herself when doubt whispered too loudly. Love, she believed, required patience and forgiveness, even when that forgiveness tasted like swallowing glass. Their wedding was simple, not the lavish affair she had once imagined, but to Danielle it was perfect because Marcus was at the altar. She wore a dress bought on sale, carried flowers arranged by her cousin, and smiled for photographs with a heart full of hope. In that moment, she believed she was beginning the best chapter of her life. The vows spoken at that altar felt unshakable, and when Marcus slid the ring on her finger, she thought she was safe. But safety built on illusion is fragile. The first year should have been filled with laughter, intimacy, and shared dreams. Instead, Danielle found herself tiptoeing through moods she didn't understand. Marcus could be affectionate in public, but distant at home, showering strangers with charm, but leaving Danielle with cold silence. At times, his compliments vanished and were replaced with criticisms disguised as jokes, subtle digs at her cooking, her weight, or her family. And each time, he excused it as stress from work or simply being real. Danielle told herself that marriage meant sacrifice, that these moments were just rough patches. She believed loyalty required silence, that if she was patient long enough, the man she fell in love with would reappear. Tanya never went away. Her shadow lingered in every phone call Marcus took outside, every text he guarded with his hand, every unexplained absence that Danielle dared not question too forcefully. Once, at a family gathering, Danielle overheard Marcus laughing with a friend about how Tanya always needed something. When she asked later what that meant, he turned it into an accusation. Why was she so insecure? Didn't she trust him? He flipped her questions into guilt and her guilt into silence. Danielle's desire to keep the peace outweighed her need to speak the truth. Slowly, she shrank, carving pieces off her voice just to maintain the illusion of harmony. Friends congratulated her on being newly married, praised Marcus's charisma, and told her how lucky she was. Danielle smiled and agreed, even though inside she carried a growing ache. She told herself luck meant having a man as handsome as Marcus, a man who had chosen her. She repeated those words until she almost believed them. But luck is a dangerous foundation for a marriage. As months turned into years, Danielle realized that what she thought was strength, her silence, her willingness to forgive, her patience, was actually weakness that Marcus exploited. He thrived on her devotion, knowing she would accept less and less while he gave her nothing more than crumbs of attention. The fairy tale Danielle believed in began to blur into a story where she was the one constantly proving her worth, the one bending further every day to hold onto a love that was already slipping away. Even in those early days, when outsiders saw a happy couple building a life together, Danielle felt the weight of loneliness creep in. It was a different kind of loneliness, one that comes not from being alone, but from lying beside someone who makes you feel invisible. Yet she told herself this was marriage, that everyone had struggles, that good wives endured and prayed for better days. She believed the narrative she had been taught, that a woman's strength lay in how much she could endure. She didn't see that the illusion was already collapsing. Marcus's promises of forever had been spoken easily, but promises are empty when not supported by respect, loyalty, and truth. Danielle was too young to recognize that then, too eager to play the part of the faithful wife to admit that the script was flawed. What she didn't know was that every compromise she made in those years, every time she silenced her doubts, was building toward a reckoning. The seeds of betrayal and humiliation were already planted, waiting for the right moment to bloom. From the moment they returned from their honeymoon, people around them began to ask when the first baby would come, when Marcus and Danielle would start a family, and while Danielle smiled politely and said they were waiting for the right time, inside she was already dreaming of cradling a child, believing that motherhood would make their marriage stronger, that children would seal the cracks that Tanya's presence had already begun to widen. Month after month, she bought tests, held her breath, and waited for 2 lines that never came. Each time the result was negative, she tucked the test into the trash with tears burning her eyes and told herself next month would be different. At first, Marcus brushed it off, saying it would happen when it was meant to. But as the months turned into a year, his tone shifted. Instead of comfort, he offered blame. One evening, pointing to a photo of his son from Tanya, Marcus said with a smirk, "I already got proof I can make babies, so what's wrong with you?" Those words cut deeper than any slap could, and soon they became his favorite weapon. Whenever Danielle cooked dinner and it wasn't exactly how he liked, he would mutter, "What's wrong with you?" When she asked him to spend less time on his phone, those same 4 words echoed through their living room. When she timidly suggested they both see a doctor, Marcus snapped that he wasn't going anywhere near a clinic because his son was living proof that he had no problem. "What's wrong with you?" became the anthem of her marriage, the refrain that haunted her as she lay awake at night counting the months and silently begging her body to cooperate. Danielle bore the shame alone, scheduling appointments, enduring ultrasounds, swallowing chalky contrast drinks, lying under humming machines while strangers in lab coats studied her body. She gave blood, submitted to exams that left her cramping and bleeding, and still she pushed forward, desperate for an answer. When the results finally came, she trembled with relief. Perfectly fertile, hormones balanced, Tubes clear, eggs healthy. Her body was fine, but when she rushed home with the news, Marcus didn't even look up from his phone. "That's good, baby," he mumbled, his thumbs still flying across the screen. She tried to explain that if she was healthy, then maybe he needed to be tested, but he cut her off coldly, saying he already had a son. He didn't need proof. The dismissal was worse than any diagnosis because it told Danielle that facts didn't matter in her marriage, only Marcus's pride. The truth was irrelevant. His version of reality was all that counted. She tried to carry the relief of her diagnosis like a shield, but Marcus found ways to pierce through it, reminding her again and again that maybe the problem wasn't men, maybe the problem was her. Those words echoed in her head every time she saw a pregnant woman at the grocery store, every time a coworker talked about maternity leave, every time her own mother looked at her with hopeful eyes. Danielle began to shrink beneath the weight of invisible failure. She bought prenatal vitamins she didn't need, hid them in the bathroom cabinet, and swallowed them anyway as if Sheryl could rewrite biology. She started timing everything, her cycles, her meals, her sleep, hoping to force her body into giving Marcus what he demanded. But no amount of planning or praying brought the miracle. Instead, each month delivered the same single line on the test, the same crushing silence in the bathroom, the same trembling hands tossing the evidence away before Marcus could find it. She endured in silence because every time she spoke, Marcus twisted her words into accusations against herself. He turned her longing for a family into proof of her inadequacy. He reminded her that Tanya had given him a child without trying, that she had done in 9 months what Danielle couldn't do in years. He framed Tanya as fertile and effortless, while Danielle was barren and broken. It wasn't true, but when you hear a lie long enough, you start to believe it. Danielle stopped talking about children, stopped suggesting doctor visits, stopped mentioning adoption or fertility treatments. She let the dream wither in her chest because chasing it only gave Marcus another opportunity to tear her down. In public, Marcus smiled and played the role of devoted husband. But in private, he sharpened his cruelty with precision, making Danielle feel smaller with every passing day. She told no one about the bruises on her wrists from his too tight grip. No one about the nights she cried herself to sleep while he stayed out working late. To her friends, she put on the face of a supportive wife, but inside she was unraveling, every thread of hope fraying under the pressure of his accusations. What Marcus didn't know was that Danielle had started to save the documents from her medical visits, tucking them into a folder she kept hidden. She didn't know why she kept them, only that some part of her needed proof that she wasn't crazy, that her body wasn't the problem. She clung to that folder like a secret weapon she wasn't yet ready to use. It gave her a sliver of power in a marriage designed to strip her of all control. But for now, she kept quiet because keeping quiet was survival. Every day, she told herself tomorrow might be better, that if she cooked the right meal or wore the right dress or smiled the right way, Marcus might soften. But Marcus didn't soften. His voice grew sharper, his patience shorter, his contempt louder. Danielle was learning the painful truth. In his eyes, she would never be enough. The illusion of their marriage was crumbling, and the dream of motherhood had become another weapon he used to wound her. Marcus was too clever to raise his fist outright, too careful about his public image to leave marks that would draw questions, but he had mastered another form of violence, a violence that lived in the pressure of his hands, the coldness of his eyes, and the venom of his voice. When dinner wasn't to his liking, his hand would clamp around her wrist just long enough to leave red marks that faded into bruises by morning. When she asked why he spent hours outside on the phone, his fingers dug into her shoulders hard enough to make her wince, his smile fixed so anyone watching might think it was affection, but Danielle knew better. These touches were warnings, reminders that she was supposed to stay quiet, reminders that her job was to accept and endure. He never screamed loudly enough for the neighbors to hear. He was too smart for that. Instead, he delivered his cruelty in whispers, carefully chosen words designed to hollow her out. He told her she was lucky he had married her because no other man would want a woman who couldn't give him children. He compared her to Tanya, reminding her that Tanya had no trouble giving him a son, reminding her that Tanya would never have failed him the way Danielle had. He took every insecurity and twisted it into proof of her worthlessness, and Danielle absorbed every blow as if it were truth, shrinking a little more each time until she no longer recognized the woman she had been at 23, full of hope and light. She became a shadow of herself, moving through the house like a ghost, careful not to provoke him, careful not to ask questions, careful not to breathe too loudly when his mood was dark. She tried to console herself by thinking that this was what marriage required, that if she was strong enough to endure, eventually Marcus would come back to her, the Marcus who had charmed her into saying yes in front of that little church. But the Marcus she longed for was gone, replaced by a man who wore cruelty like a second skin. When Marcus came home late, smelling of cologne she had never bought, Danielle told herself not to ask where he had been. When his phone buzzed with messages that made him smirk, she told herself to look away. When he left for hours under the excuse of spending time with his son, she told herself to be patient. And each time she swallowed the truth, a piece of her disappeared. She started to lose weight without trying, her appetite dulled by constant anxiety, her sleep broken by dreams of children that never came. Friends noticed she seemed tired, but she laughed it off, blaming long hours at work. She wore long sleeves to cover the faint bruises, and when her mother asked if everything was all right, Danielle pasted on her best smile and said she was fine. No one saw the way she cried in the bathroom with the water running to muffle the sound. No one saw the way she pressed her palms into her ears to drown out Marcus's words that played on repeat in her head. "You're barren. You're broken. You're lucky anyone even wanted you." His words became her truth, even as her hidden folder of medical records told a different story. That folder was her secret, her proof, the only thing that reminded her she wasn't what he claimed. But she never dared confront him with it, because confrontation always ended the same way, with him staring at her with icy disdain, with his hands tightening just enough to silence her, with her collapsing into apology, though she had done nothing wrong. The cycle became her life, a loop of cruelty and forgiveness, of wounds and apologies, of silence and regret. Marcus played the part of the charming husband in public, laughing at parties, shaking hands with neighbors, acting the role of the man who had it all together, and people believed him. They saw Danielle smiling at his side and assumed she was content, assumed she was living the fairy tale she had once believed in. They didn't see that her smile was painted on, that her laughter was hollow, that her soul was bruised in ways no one could measure. By the end of the 4th year of their marriage, Danielle barely recognized herself. She had entered the marriage with dreams of a house full of children, of building something beautiful with Marcus, but now she could barely imagine surviving another day in his presence. Her world had shrunk to the walls of their house, her life reduced to managing his moods and avoiding his anger. The hope she had once carried so brightly was dim, flickering like a candle about to burn out. Yet despite everything, Danielle still clung to the belief that things could change, that if she just loved him enough, endured enough, sacrificed enough, Marcus would remember the vows they had spoken in that church. She prayed silently at night, prayed for strength, prayed for a miracle, prayed for a child that might heal the rift between them. But no miracle came, and Marcus's cruelty only deepened, his resentment sharper with each passing day. He made Danielle feel like a guest in her own marriage, like a placeholder until someone better came along. She was learning the most painful truth of all, that she was not Marcus's partner, she was his scapegoat, the target for every frustration, the vessel for every disappointment. And still, she stayed. She stayed because leaving felt like failure, stayed because she had no money of her own, stayed because she had been convinced that no one else would ever want her. She stayed because she had given Marcus everything, her love, her loyalty, her body, and she didn't know who she was without him. Silent abuse left no visible scars, but it carved deep wounds into her spirit. It told her she was worthless, that she was disposable, that she was nothing without Marcus's approval. And yet, buried beneath the weight of his cruelty, a small spark of truth still lived inside her. The knowledge tucked away in that hidden folder of medical records, the faint memory of the woman she had been before him. Marcus's job at the auto shop began to slow, or so he claimed, and suddenly the man who once strutted with pride about being a provider was sulking about bills and overdue notices. Danielle had always been careful, clipping coupons, skipping lunches, buying generic brands, so she could save little by little, and over the years she had quietly built a savings account of $12,000. To her, it was a safety net, a nest egg for a future house, or perhaps the fertility treatments Marcus always refused to consider. But when Marcus discovered the money one evening, his eyes lit up with a hunger Danielle had never seen before. $12,000, he repeated slowly, his voice low and sharp. "You've been sitting on $12,000 while I'm out here stressing?" Danielle explained that she was saving for them, for their future, but Marcus cut her off, insisting their future was now and that he had an opportunity that would change everything. He told her his friend Damon was opening a second dry cleaning business and needed a partner, and that this was their chance to escape the constant struggle. Danielle felt every instinct in her body screaming at her to hold back, to say no, but when Marcus softened his tone, cupped her face gently, and whispered that once he wasn't stressed about money, they could finally focus on starting their family, she let hope drown out her fear. That night, she emptied her savings account, slid the envelope of cash into his hands, and listened as he promised that this would be the beginning of their real life together. Unbeknownst to Marcus, Danielle recorded that conversation on her phone, not out of distrust, but out of some faint, inexplicable instinct to capture the rare moment when he spoke of love and partnership again. It was her way of preserving evidence that once, at least once, he had acknowledged her sacrifices. The business took off faster than she could have imagined. Within 6 months, Marcus was making more money than ever, strutting through the house with his chest puffed out, buying new suits, expensive cologne, and shoes polished like mirrors. But with success came arrogance, and the Marcus who had once blamed her for their infertility now blamed her for not keeping up with his new lifestyle. He stayed out later, claimed business meetings whenever he disappeared, and treated Danielle less like a wife and more like an employee who should be grateful to exist in his orbit. The money she had sacrificed did not bring her closer to him. It built a wall between them, a wall fortified by his ego and sharpened by his disdain. She still worked at the department store, still budgeted carefully to pay for groceries. While Marcus flaunted dinners at restaurants, she was never invited to and returned home smelling of wine she hadn't tasted. The cruelty was no longer only in whispers, but in blatant indifference, the smug satisfaction of a man who thought he had outgrown his wife. One Thursday, Danielle planned a small surprise, determined to claw back some shred of intimacy. She bought groceries for his favorite meal, fried chicken and mac and cheese, and prepared to tell him she had saved enough for a modest weekend trip to Savannah, thinking perhaps a getaway might restore what had been lost. But when she arrived home early, arms full of bags, she froze on the porch as she heard laughter through the door. Marcus's voice was unmistakable, but so was Tanya's. Danielle stood rooted as she listened to the woman who had haunted her marriage from the start mocking her as pathetic, playing house like it was real, and Marcus replying that he was tired of pretending. that he didn't need Danielle anymore now that money was flowing. Then came the dagger, Tanya laughing in delight when Marcus admitted Danielle had given him her entire savings, calling her so desperate for his love that she would probably give him her kidneys if he asked. They laughed together at her devotion, her sacrifice, her love, until Danielle could hardly breathe. She sat in her car for hours afterward, shaking with the realization that every sacrifice she had made had been a joke to him, fuel for his contempt. When she finally walked inside later, Marcus was alone on the couch watching TV, his casual "hey baby" as though nothing had happened, twisting the knife further. Danielle cooked that meal anyway, served him with trembling hands, and watched him eat while her heart turned to ash. 3 days later, he handed her divorce papers without ceremony, calling their marriage over as casually as if he were canceling a subscription. He told her they had no children, no love, nothing left to salvage, and when she asked about the business and the money she had given him, he smirked and called it a gift. That word, gift, burned into her memory, erasing the years of work and the dreams she had poured into him. In a month, Tanya and her children had moved into Danielle's house, sleeping in her bed, filling her kitchen with their laughter while Danielle packed what little remained into her Honda Civic. At 29 years old, she was back to nothing, no husband, no home, no savings, and no children, reduced to driving away from a life that had drained her dry. The price of her loyalty had been everything: her money, her pride, her self-respect, and yet Marcus discarded her as if she had never mattered at all. She returned to Chicago with her head bowed, defeated, convinced that she had failed at the one role she had believed she was born for. But deep inside, though she could not yet see it, the recording of Marcus's promises sat quietly in her phone, and the memory of his betrayal simmered into something she would one day use. For now, she was only a broken woman crawling back to her mother's home, unaware that this ending would be the beginning of a new story, a story where Marcus's cruelty would become the fuel for her rise. She replayed Tanya's laughter over and over, the way they mocked her desperation, the way Marcus dismissed her as disposable after she had given him everything. By the time she reached Chicago, Danielle was numb, a hollow shell of the hopeful young woman who had once believed in fairy tales. She returned to her mother's modest home, where the walls smelled faintly of the small restaurant her mother had once run with pride. But her mother was not the same strong woman Danielle remembered. Illness had worn her down, diabetes and high blood pressure gnawing at her strength, until she was working 2 jobs just to pay for medications. Danielle walked into that home with her shoulders hunched and her head bowed, ashamed to be 29 and starting over with nothing. But her mother welcomed her with open arms and eyes filled with love instead of judgment. "I'm sorry you have to see me like this," her mother whispered on that first night, but Danielle shook her head, clutching her hands tightly, insisting she was the one who should be sorry for chasing after a man who never deserved her while her mother struggled alone. "Don't you dare blame yourself for loving," her mother said firmly, her voice breaking yet steady. "That's not weakness, that's strength." The words pierced Danielle's armor, reminding her that the capacity to love, even when it hurts, was a gift, not a flaw. But even with her mother's encouragement, Danielle was broken. She spent days lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how she had been so blind, replaying Marcus's cruelty until her self-worth shriveled smaller and smaller. Nights were worse, the silence filled with memories of bruising hands and whispered insults, the taste of betrayal sour in her mouth. Depression clung to her like a heavy blanket, smothering even the faintest spark of hope. It was during one of those bleak afternoons that she first noticed Robert Lawson, a tall man with kind eyes and a camera always slung around his neck. He had been hired to document revitalization efforts in their neighborhood and kept stopping by to photograph, the shuttered restaurant her mother once ran. "I know it's closed," he said softly one day, "but there's beauty in its bones. I can see the love that went into it." Danielle avoided him at first, too raw to face anyone new, too exhausted to pretend she was okay. But Robert had a way of showing up without demanding anything. Sometimes he brought groceries for her mother. Sometimes he fixed a broken faucet or carried heavy boxes. And sometimes he simply sat quietly near Danielle without asking her to talk. His presence was gentle, a balm she didn't know she needed. After 3 months, she finally told him everything. The marriage, the money, the infertility accusations, the betrayal. She braced for pity or judgment, but Robert's eyes burned with anger. Not at her, but for her. "That man is a fool," Robert said with quiet conviction. "He didn't deserve you, and one day he'll realize what he lost." For the first time in years, Danielle felt her heart stir, not with longing for Marcus's approval, but with recognition that she wasn't worthless. Robert treated her with patience, with kindness, with respect. He never pressed her for more than she could give, never rushed her healing, never asked for more than her presence. Meanwhile, Danielle began accompanying her mother to doctor appointments, cooking healthier meals, and slowly reclaiming small pieces of her life. She began to look at the old restaurant differently, seeing not just the dust and broken chairs, but the sturdy bones that still held promise. She remembered the laughter of neighbors who once crowded its tables, the smell of spices and warmth, the sense of community her mother had created. Ideas started to form, fragile but insistent. What if she could transform the space into something new, something that served the needs of the changing neighborhood? She dove into research at the library, studying food trucks, meal prep services, nutrition, and small business strategies. Her heart, which had once been consumed by Marcus's approval, now found new fuel in the vision of building something of her own. At night, she experimented in her mother's kitchen, turning quinoa and roasted vegetables into colorful bowls, blending smoothies, preparing meals that were both healthy and affordable. Her mother became her taste tester and cheerleader, declaring with every bite that Danielle was destined for success. Still, fear whispered in her ear. What if she failed again? What if all her efforts amounted to nothing? But Robert stood by her, offering more than words. He began filming her journey, capturing her trips to the farmer's market, her late-night experiments, even her tears when recipes failed. "I'm not doing this for money," he told her one evening when she tried to protest. "I'm doing this because I believe in you." Danielle wasn't ready to call it love yet, but she couldn't deny the comfort of his steady presence, the way his quiet faith made her feel capable again. For 2 years, she worked relentlessly, saving every penny from her grocery store job, experimenting night after night in the kitchen, and watching Robert's footage pile up like a testament to her rebirth. She taught herself how to tile, paint, and renovate, transforming the tired restaurant into a bright, inviting space she called Nourish, honoring her mother's belief that food should heal both body and soul. On opening day, fear nearly paralyzed her, but by noon there was a line out the door. People wanted what she offered: fresh meals, affordable smoothies, food that fed both hunger and hope. The work was grueling, 16-hour days, endless bookkeeping, countless setbacks, but Danielle was no longer the hollow woman Marcus had discarded. She was rebuilding one bowl, one smoothie, one customer at a time. Success didn't come overnight, but slowly, steadily, it grew, and with it, Danielle's spirit. She began to laugh again, to smile without faking, to see herself not as broken, but as resilient. Robert remained by her side, his camera capturing not just her triumphs, but her tears, documenting the transformation of a woman Marcus had called worthless into a woman who was building an empire. By the end of that second year, Danielle realized she was no longer living in Marcus's shadow, but she kept moving, driven by the fire of survival. driven by the desire to prove to herself that she was more than Marcus Reed's discarded wife. Slowly, customers grew into regulars. Neighbors began spreading the word, and local families started relying on Nourish for their weekly meals. By the second year, Danielle had hired part-time staff, expanded the menu, and started dreaming bigger. Robert remained a constant presence, capturing every step of the journey with his camera, encouraging her to share her story publicly. At first, Danielle resisted, afraid of exposure, afraid Marcus might somehow reappear and mock her progress. But Robert's gentle insistence eventually won. He posted a simple video of her philosophy, explaining that food should nourish body and soul, her face half hidden in shadows to preserve her privacy. That video went viral, first with 1,000 views, then 10,000, then 50,000. Suddenly, Nourish wasn't just a neighborhood eatery. It was a brand people across the country wanted to know about. Orders began pouring in for packaged meals and smoothie mixes. Food bloggers reached out, local news stations ran features, and suddenly Danielle was at the helm of something larger than she had ever imagined. It was overwhelming but exhilarating, proof that she was capable of creating beauty from ruins. Amid the chaos, something unexpected happened. Danielle missed a period. At first, she dismissed it as stress, but when nausea struck and fatigue hit harder than usual, she bought a test. Then another, then a third, each one read positive. Her hands shook as she showed Robert, tears springing to her eyes. After years of Marcus blaming her, after years of being told she was barren, her body had not only conceived, but conceived quickly and naturally. Robert cried openly, holding her as if she were carrying treasure. Still, fear haunted her. What if something went wrong? What if Marcus had been right after all? But the first ultrasound silenced those doubts with a revelation so staggering it left her breathless. 3 heartbeats. Triplets. The doctor smiled as Danielle lay in stunned silence, Robert gripping her hand in awe. 3 healthy babies, proof that Marcus's cruelty had been built on lies, proof that love and support could unlock what despair had kept hidden. The pregnancy was grueling, her body stretched to its limits, forcing her to step back from daily operations of Nourish. But Danielle had built a team strong enough to carry her vision forward, and she trusted them while she focused on growing her daughters. When the girls were born, 3 beautiful daughters with Robert's eyes and Danielle's smile, the room overflowed with joy. Danielle whispered, "Look what we made," not only about her children, but about the life they had built together, a life Marcus could never have given her. For the next 2 years, Danielle and Robert lived in quiet abundance. Nourish expanded into grocery stores nationwide. They bought a house with a big yard for the girls, and Danielle's mother was gifted a home where she could rest without worry. Their personal lives remained private, with Roberts carefully avoiding full exposure of their family in videos, allowing them peace away from public eyes. Danielle sometimes thought of Marcus, but only in passing, like a character from an old story she no longer identified with. She had deleted everything from her old life when she left Atlanta, and as far as Marcus knew, she had vanished. It was exactly how she wanted it, until the phone call that shifted everything. One Sunday evening, while Robert chased the girls around the living room and Danielle helped her mother set the table, the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, and they usually ignored unknown calls, but her mother answered. Danielle watched her mother's expression darken as she listened, watched her lips tighten before she covered the receiver and looked straight at her daughter. "It's Marcus." Danielle's blood went cold, her peaceful home suddenly invaded by the ghost of her past. "Hang up, Mama," she whispered urgently, but her mother shook her head. "I'm going to hear what this fool has to say." Danielle could hear Marcus's familiar smooth tone on the other end, his cadence instantly recognizable even though she couldn't catch every word. Her mother listened for a moment longer before her lips curled with disdain. "Isn't that nice for you?" she said, her voice laced with venom before ending the call. Then she turned to Danielle. "He's getting married to Tanya, and he wants you to come to the wedding." The absurdity of it made Danielle laugh bitterly, but her mother's glare told her it was no joke. He wanted her there not out of kindness but cruelty, to flaunt his success, to rub her face in the family he had built on the ruins of her sacrifices. He thought she was still that broken woman who had left Atlanta with nothing. He thought she would show up desperate, pitiful, proof of his triumph. Danielle sat down hard, the weight of his audacity pressing down on her. But instead of fear, fire lit inside her. "He has no idea who I am now," she murmured, glancing at Robert, who had returned to the room with their daughters in tow. Robert's eyes darkened as she explained, his fists tightening as he realized the depth of Marcus's disrespect. "He thinks he's going to humiliate you," Robert said. "He has no idea." Danielle lifted her chin, meeting her husband's steady gaze. "Then let's show him, not out of revenge, but closure." She wanted to walk into that wedding not as Marcus's discarded wife, but as the woman she had become, a successful entrepreneur, a mother of triplets, a wife adored by a good man. She wanted to show Marcus and herself just how far she had risen. Robert insisted on booking a suite at the Four Seasons, not for extravagance, but for comfort, so Danielle could enter the battlefield from a place of strength. Their daughters buzzed with excitement at the idea of flying in a plane, chattering about clouds and snacks, unaware of the storm of meaning behind this journey. As the plane lifted off from Chicago, Danielle looked out the window, her chest tight with memories of leaving Atlanta broken and empty years before. She remembered her old Honda Civic packed with boxes, the weight of shame pressing down as she drove away from everything she had lost. Now she returned not in defeat, but in triumph, with her husband at her side, her daughters in tow, and her mother's blessing resting on her shoulders. When they arrived, the girls were dazzled by the luxury of the hotel, bouncing on the wide beds, pressing their noses to the tall windows that overlooked the skyline. Danielle tucked them in that night and sat awake long after, staring at the ceiling, her mind swirling with doubts. What if Marcus succeeded in humiliating her? What if she crumbled in the presence of a sneer? Robert reached for her hand in the dark, his grip steady, his voice certain. "You are not that woman anymore. You are Danielle Carter Lawson, CEO of Nourish, mother of 3 miracles, my wife. You go there not to prove to him, but to prove to yourself." The morning of the wedding dawned bright and sharp. Danielle dressed in a deep emerald gown that shimmered against her skin, elegant but not ostentatious, a statement of quiet power. Robert's charcoal suit made him look like he had stepped out of a magazine, and the girls in their yellow dresses looked like sunflowers come to life, cheerful and impossible to ignore. At 1:30, the limousine arrived. Danielle hesitated at the door, worried it was too much, but Robert reminded her this wasn't about showing off, it was about showing up. As the car pulled up to the hotel, Danielle's heart hammered. She saw other guests arriving in expensive cars, dressed in silks and jewels, and for a fleeting moment the memory of being the poor department store clerk who never belonged surged inside her. But then the doorman opened their door, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of their radiant family, and Danielle stepped out, head held high. Inside, signs directed them to the Morrison Williams wedding. Music and laughter spilled from the ballroom, the air rich with expensive flowers and champagne. Danielle drew a deep breath as Robert offered his arm, their daughters holding hands between them. When they entered, heads began to turn. At first, people didn't recognize them, but as eyes lingered on Danielle's gown, on Robert's commanding presence, on the 3 identical girls with bright smiles, Murmurs rippled through the crowd. And then Danielle saw him. Marcus stood near the bar, glass in hand, surrounded by laughter, his suit perfectly cut, his smile wide and confident. But when his eyes met hers, the smile froze, the confidence faltered. He excused himself from his group and started across the room, his gaze darting from Danielle to Robert to the girls, as though trying to piece together a puzzle that didn't fit. Danielle felt her pulse steady, her spine straighten. Marcus's voice wavered when he finally spoke. "Danielle?" She inclined her head politely. "Thank you for the invitation, Marcus." The sound of husband on Robert's lips when he introduced himself made Marcus flinch, and when Danielle placed her hands on her daughter's shoulders, introducing them one by one, the word triplets landed like a blow. Marcus's face went pale as he realized the woman he had mocked as barren stood before him with 3 living testaments to her strength. He stammered congratulations, his words flat, forced, while Danielle smiled serenely and returned the sentiment with a grace that sliced sharper than any insult. Soon Veronica approached, radiant in her gown, her smile gracious until Danielle introduced herself. Recognition dawned slowly, and Veronica's smile faltered as she looked between Danielle and Marcus. Danielle remained composed, congratulating her warmly, admiring her beauty, her tone generous enough to make Marcus look even smaller. When Veronica excused herself with her mother, Danielle noticed the older woman's sharp glance. Curiosity ignited. The stage was set. Marcus tried to steer the conversation, to regain control, but every word from Danielle undercut his narrative. She mentioned Nourish casually, revealing its national reach. Watching awareness spread in Marcus's eyes as he realized she was not just surviving, she was thriving. Robert played his role with quiet strength, tending to the girls, exuding calm, showing Marcus what real fatherhood and partnership looked like. Guests began whispering, glancing toward their group, sensing tension beneath the surface of the polished celebration. Danielle saw Marcus's jaw tighten as she reminded him gently of the promises he had once made about their future, promises she had recorded, promises she had used to build a future without him. For a moment, Danielle wondered if perhaps Marcus would avoid acknowledging her further, if his strategy was to ignore her presence, but she should have known better. This was his stage, and he would not let it pass without using it to reinforce the narrative he had built about himself. The speeches began with harmless humor, the best man sharing embarrassing stories of Marcus's bachelor party, the maid of honor offering sweet words about Tanya's loyalty. The crowd laughed and clapped, their faces glowing with goodwill, unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. Then Marcus stood, his voice smooth, his confidence returning as he surveyed the crowd. He thanked the guests for coming, praised Tanya's beauty, and then launched into a speech that made Danielle's stomach twist. He spoke of love as if he were lecturing, redefining it to fit his own failures. Love, he said, was not about mere tolerance. Love was about finding someone who could challenge you, someone who could elevate you, someone who could help you realize your true potential. He looked straight at Tanya, but every word was an arrow aimed at Danielle. The implication was unmistakable. She had not been enough. She had not made him better. She had held him back. He painted himself as a man who had stumbled before finding the true path, and Tanya as the woman who saved him from mediocrity. The guests nodded, some even wiped tears, but Danielle clenched her fists beneath the table, her pulse pounding with the injustice of hearing 6 years of sacrifice erased with a smile. When Tanya rose to give her own speech, Danielle braced herself. The bride began graciously enough, thanking family and friends, speaking of triumph over challenges, of finding true partnership. But then her eyes found Danielle across the room, and her tone shifted. She began to speak of Marcus's past marriage, choosing her words carefully at first, but with an edge that sharpened as she went. She said some women love with conditions, abandoning their men when life grows hard. She said Marcus's first wife had never given him the one thing that mattered most: a child, 6 years of marriage with nothing to show for it. She spoke of fruitfulness, of legacy, of proving real love through children. Danielle's face burned, her daughter squirmed restlessly beside her, and Robert's hand closed firmly over hers. The bride's words were knives cloaked in lace, striking deep, twisting the old wounds Marcus had inflicted. The room shifted uneasily, guests sensing the cruelty beneath the celebration, eyes flicking toward the back where Danielle sat. Marcus sat smugly beside Tanya, his expression betraying satisfaction. He had wanted this. He had orchestrated it. Danielle inhaled deeply, and something crystallized inside her. She had come for closure, but now she realized closure would not come from silence. Closure would come from truth. When the DJ announced it was time for toasts from family and friends, guests rose one by one, offering sweet anecdotes, praising the couple. Marcus relaxed, believing his plan had succeeded, believing Danielle would leave that ballroom diminished once again. But when the DJ asked if anyone else wished to speak, Danielle stood. The crowd collectively gasped, heads swiveling as she glided to the microphone, her gown shimmering like a queen's armor, Robert's steady gaze burning in her back as he held their daughters close. "My name is Danielle Carter Lawson," she said clearly, Marcus's ex-wife. The silence that fell was thick enough to choke on. She began with grace, thanking Marcus and Tanya for the invitation, praising Tanya's beauty, acknowledging the joy of love and partnership. But then her voice sharpened, slicing through the tension like a blade. She reminded the room of the 6 years she had spent with Marcus, 6 years of sacrifice, 6 years of love given without return. She told them about the $12,000 she had saved through skipped meals and double shifts. Money Marcus had begged her for to start the business that funded the very celebration they sat in. She pulled her phone from her purse, pressed play, and Marcus's voice filled the ballroom from a recording she had made years earlier, promising that the money was an investment in their future, their dreams together. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Danielle paused the recording, holding the silence until it became unbearable. Then she dropped the second bombshell. She pulled out medical records, proving her fertility had always been sound, her body never the problem. She revealed Marcus had refused testing, choosing instead to blame her. Then she revealed the DNA test results, proving that Fred, the boy Marcus had claimed as his proof of virility, was not his son. The murmurs became shouts, guests pulling out phones, whispers hissing across the ballroom. Marcus's face drained of color, his hands trembling as his carefully constructed facade began to collapse. But Danielle was not done. She held up another document, the results of Marcus's own genetic test, obtained through strands of hair and toothbrush bristles. Marcus Reed was infertile, had always been infertile, and would never father a biological child, which meant that even Tanya's daughter, Kennedy, was not his. Tanya's champagne glass fell and shattered, her face pale as truth detonated her world. The ballroom erupted in chaos, gasps, whispers, cell phones held high recording every word. Danielle's voice cut through the noise, steady and strong. No longer for Marcus, but for herself and every woman who had ever been diminished by a man's lies. She introduced her daughters then, 3 radiant girls with Robert's eyes, proof that love and respect had unlocked what cruelty had suppressed. She spoke of Nourish, the business she had built, the empire that now employed hundreds and fed thousands. She told the room she was no longer Marcus's victim, but her own champion. Then she turned to Marcus one last time. "Thank you," she said, "for showing me what I did not want, for teaching me my worth by failing to recognize it." Within 24 hours, Atlanta's gossip blogs ran the story with relish. Headlines screamed about the wedding that turned into a courtroom drama, complete with blurry cell phone videos of Danielle's speech and leaked audio of Marcus promising her that $12,000 was their share investment. More devastating still were the documents Danielle had displayed, screenshots of fertility records, DNA tests, and genetic results that stripped Marcus of the image he had wielded like a weapon. By the end of the week, national outlets had picked up the story. Customers of his dry cleaning chain began questioning his integrity, wondering aloud on Facebook whether they could trust a man whose entire persona had been built on deception. Contracts with high-end clients were abruptly canceled. A local boutique owner who had proudly posted pictures with Marcus now deleted everyone. The collapse wasn't just financial, it was social. His so-called friends, the men who had toasted him at the wedding, began distancing themselves, unwilling to be associated with a man whose name was suddenly synonymous with fraud. Tanya filed for divorce before the honeymoon could even happen. Her attorney moved swiftly, citing irreconcilable differences, but privately leaking that she felt duped by Marcus's long-concealed infertility. She demanded half of the business assets, spousal support, and child support for Kennedy, though Marcus was no longer even her presumed father. The irony was cruel. For years, Marcus had mocked Danielle for her supposed barrenness, and now the truth about his condition not only humiliated him, but ensured he would pay for children who weren't biologically his. His empire began to unravel piece by piece. Creditors came calling, revealing that Marcus's luxury lifestyle had been fueled not by steady profits, but by loans and credit card debt. The 3 dry cleaning locations that had once seemed like the cornerstone of his success were suddenly liabilities. One store closed within months, the staff laid off, the windows papered over with for lease signs. The second location struggled to stay afloat as word of the scandal lingered in the city's gossip, customers choosing competitors rather than risk being tied to Marcus's name. Marcus tried to fight back publicly. He posted long messages on social media, calling Danielle a bitter ex-wife seeking revenge, accusing her of fabricating documents, insisting the DNA tests were lies. But the more he raged, the more pitiful he looked. People replayed Danielle's calm composure at the microphone, her quiet strength as she introduced her daughters, the undeniable fact that Nourish had grown into a national brand while Marcus's empire crumbled. Every word he wrote only fueled the fire of ridicule. Memes spread, mocking his fall from grace. The man who had once strutted around Atlanta in designer suits became the butt of late-night jokes, his name trending not for success but for scandal. Meanwhile, Danielle thrived in ways she hadn't expected. The viral video of her speech not only humiliated Marcus, but spotlighted her courage. Women reached out from across the country, thanking her for exposing the kind of lies and cruelty they had suffered in silence. Local reporters requested interviews. Entrepreneurs asked her to speak at conferences, and advocacy groups invited her to share her story. Danielle initially hesitated, wary of stepping back into the spotlight, but Robert reminded her that her truth could empower others. What Marcus had intended as her humiliation became her platform. Yet Danielle remained grounded. She poured herself back into Nourish, expanding operations to meet demand while protecting her daughters from the noise. Zoe, Zura, and Zuri were too young to understand the storm swirling around them, and Danielle wanted to keep it that way. At home, life remained simple: family dinners, bedtime stories, weekends in the backyard. Marcus, meanwhile, spiraled. Tanya's divorce dragged him through court, exposing his finances, his debts, and the fragile foundations of his empire. The $12,000 Danielle had invested resurfaced in filings, her recording proving that it was not a gift, but a partnership agreement. Lawyers debated whether she retained a financial claim on his assets, and Marcus found himself fighting on 3 legal fronts at once: divorce proceedings, business litigation, and creditors threatening foreclosure. His arrogance, once his armor, became his undoing. In depositions, he snapped at attorneys, contradicted himself, and revealed just how deeply he had deceived those around him. Judges were not swayed by his charm, and juries of peers were unimpressed by his suits and speeches. He was stripped bare, forced to face the consequences of years of deceit. Danielle received a call from Tanya's attorney one morning, asking if she would consider testifying about her financial contributions and Marcus's pattern of manipulation. Danielle thought long and hard, torn between leaving Marcus in her past and ensuring justice was served. Robert reminded her that this was not about revenge, but about accountability. In the end, Danielle chose to testify, not with bitterness, but with clarity. She told the court about the years of emotional abuse, the money she had sacrificed, the lies he had woven. She presented her documents and her recordings, her voice steady as she laid out the truth. Marcus sat at the defense table, deflated, unable to spin her words into anything other than what they were: fact. The ruling was devastating for him. The judge ordered significant compensation to Danielle for her initial investment plus interest, half of his remaining business assets to Tanya, and garnished wages for child support. The man who once boasted that he had proof of his virility, that he was destined for greatness, now found himself stripped of wealth, reputation, and family. Danielle, however, walked out of the courthouse with Robert by her side and her daughters waiting at home, her dignity intact, her future secure. She had not sought revenge, but justice had found her anyway. For Danielle, though, the story was never about him anymore. It was about what came after. Nourish had become more than a business. It was a mission. With national recognition, Danielle expanded into meal prep programs for schools and community centers, offering affordable nutrition to families who had once relied on fast food out of necessity. She partnered with nonprofits to deliver fresh meals to shelters, clinics, and senior centers. The logo that had started as a small heart made of leaves was now stamped across refrigerated trucks driving across multiple states. Each time Danielle saw one, she thought about the $12,000 Marcus had called a gift and realized how wrong he had been. It was never a gift, it was a seed, and she had planted it in better soil, watered it with perseverance, and grown it into something that nourished not just her, but countless others. At home, life was richer than she had ever dreamed. The triplets grew quickly, their personalities unfolding in 3 distinct yet harmoniously blended ways. Zoe was bold, Zara thoughtful, Zuri playful, and each carried pieces of Robert and Danielle in ways that reminded her daily that love creates more than children. It creates wholeness. Robert remained her anchor, documenting not her pain anymore, but their joy. He filmed the girls' birthday parties, the restaurant's bustling evenings, and Danielle's speaking engagements where women stood in line to thank her for giving voice to their silent suffering. Each night, when they sat together after the children had gone to bed, Danielle marveled at the gentleness in his eyes, the steadiness of his love, and knew she had been right to wait until she was healed before opening her heart to him. Her past had been a lesson in what love was not. Her present was proof of what love could be. Marcus, meanwhile, became the ghost story people whispered about. A man who had everything in his hands and squandered it on arrogance and deceit. Danielle heard through mutual acquaintances that he worked shifts at someone else's shop now, stripped of his empire, estranged from Tanya, living in a rented apartment he could barely afford. She felt no satisfaction in the image. Instead, she felt pity. Pity for a man who would never know what it felt like to be truly loved, to build something real, to leave behind a legacy worth remembering. She had learned the difference between revenge and justice, and the difference between justice and peace. Revenge had been his game, justice had been the court's. But peace, that had been her own choice, her own victory. Years passed, and Danielle found herself standing on a stage in Denver before hundreds of women, the keynote speaker at a conference on resilience. She told her story, not as a tale of scandal, but as a testament to transformation. She spoke about how pain could hollow you out, but in that hollow space lay room for something greater. She told them about the nights she cried in hospital parking lots, about the humiliation of being called barren, about the loneliness of watching her husband invest in another woman while erasing her worth. But she also told them about the mornings she rose anyway, the meals she prepped in her mother's kitchen, the business she built brick by brick, the love she found that was steady instead of flashy, deep instead of shallow. When she finished, the applause thundered, but what mattered were the tears she saw in the eyes of the women who lined up afterward. They whispered, "I was her once." They said, "Your story saved me." They told her they had left their own Marcuses, built their own Nourishes, discovered their own Roberts. Danielle realized then that Marcus had been nothing more than the prologue to her real story. The life she lived now, the family dinners, the growing business, the speeches that planted hope in broken hearts, that was the novel. One evening back in Chicago, Robert asked her quietly on the porch as the girls chased fireflies in the yard, "Do you ever wish it had been different?" Danielle thought about it carefully. She thought about the wasted years, the scars on her wrists from Marcus's grips, the tears shed in silence. But she also thought about the strength she had found, the man she had married, the daughters who carried her laughter, the empire that bore her values. If it had been different, she said finally, "I wouldn't be me. And I like who I am." Robert kissed her hand, and the moment lingered like the soft hum of cicadas in the summer night. The past no longer defined her. It had forged her. Marcus Reed was a footnote now, a cautionary tale in the margins of her success. But Danielle Carter-Lawson was the headline, the story of a woman who had been broken open only to rebuild herself stronger than steel. She had walked into her ex-husband's wedding with triplets on her hip and dignity in her heart, but she had walked out with something even greater, the understanding that no man, no betrayal, no cruelty could define her. Only she could, and she had chosen to be defined by resilience, by love, by the life she had built from ashes. The end. If you stayed with me through this story, I want to thank you. Stories like Danielle's remind us how resilience, truth, and love can turn the worst betrayals into the foundation of a beautiful life. If you found meaning in this, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next story, and give this video a like to help it reach more people who may need to hear it. I also want to hear from you. What part of the plot struck you the most? Was it the moment she revealed the truth at the wedding, or the way she built her life afterward? And tell me, where are you watching this from right now? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I love seeing the different places this community comes together. Your perspective matters here, and your support keeps us sharing these powerful stories every single day.